Thank you. I think, Paddy, I mean, from my point of view, I think to kind of give that intro, I think the reason I was so interested in reading this is those that know me already know that I know what I think needs to happen in the world, and I want to work out how we make it happen. And that's kind of, is always my why, is how do we make the changes happen that we need? And I think for me, it was incredibly exciting to actually start to read this and just see this blueprint that doesn't go, oh, we need individual action, or we need systemic change, or we need governance. It's a really nuts and bolts. This is things that we can do that will make change happen. So I think that for me is, where I come from on this, Paddy. And so I think, do you simply want to come over now and just spend 20 minutes explaining to us a little bit about the how?
Yes, cool. I will do. Um, yeah. So just to kind of give a quick introduction to me, as it were, I've got a slightly unusual background for someone writing about these kind of things. Initially I studied maths at Cambridge and then became an accountant at KPMG. But I became an accountant like when I started to qualifying as an accountant. My plan already at that point was that I essentially used it to buy time by getting contract work once I qualified. And then I went and kind of went on adventures, getting into exploring kind of thing, but exploring of cultures and living with different cultures around the world. And that period kind of culminated with a couple of years in the Amazon, including a year sponsored by the Royal Geographical Society to be taught by a traditional wisdom keeper from a culture in the jungle. I was the whole time I was immersing myself in the indigenous world kind of thing. And that ended at the end of 2014. And for lots of complicated reasons, it was very successful, but for complicated reasons, it's a very bizarre society that I was in. It was best that I didn't go back there in the short term kind of thing, not because I had problems with them, but just because of complications to do with their attitude to outside kind of projects and things. And so in 2015, I had a kind of open future. I was looking for a new project. I had a bit of money in the bank from my previous accounting stint. And of course, I was more and more worried about the environmental crisis. So I decided to focus on understanding how we can redesign society to make it much better. And so the fact that it was due to the environmental crisis that was one of the main impulses makes it sound like it's coming from a negative side, but actually it also was coming, and my kind of feeling is coming, as it were, from a positive side, insofar as I feel like, and I felt like this ever since, I was an adult kind of thing, at least, society could be much better than it is. Like we can redesign things. I feel like where we are now in terms of social organization in the West, or societal organization, is a phase, but it's not the be all and end all. Like for example, in the kind of mainstream media and that, they often talk about full employment as a kind of the best thing, the thing we need to get to kind of thing. But that's like everyone working 40 hours a week in the same job, most people not really wanting that job. I mean, it's currently necessary for society to keep going and everyone to have what they need in that. But that doesn't mean that's the best way of organizing society. We could have much more fulfilling lives than that. So yeah, I kind of came at it from and the other thing is that from technological and social innovations over the last kind of 50 years or so, I think we do have an opportunity that we didn't have before to redesign society and make it much better. Like if we were to kind of start with a blank slate now, but with the knowledge, technological, organizational, about people in the world knowledge that we have, we wouldn't make society the way it is. So I basically wanted to work out what a better society would look like and how we can get there from where we are, because obviously we do have a big complicated system and we want to kind of get from here to, we have to get from here to there. We can't just come up with some utopia that can never be put into practice. It's got to be practical. So yeah, I was kind of looking into this and reading lots of books and articles, and there are a lot of things about the problems and about general ideas of solutions and things like government policies that, you know, theoretically, if the government put into place various policies, they could transform the system because they have lots of power. But theoretically is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because the governments don't really want to change the system generally, right? The governments we have at the moment. So that's not like a practical way of moving forward. So I kind of, in reading these books, I found myself that I would often get to the end of the books and articles and what have you with a frustratingly unanswered question, but what should we actually do? And so with a bit of prodding from someone I spoke with, I had loads of ideas and I was chatting about them, and someone was like, you should write a book. So I thought, okay, yeah, maybe I will. And it's been quite a journey since then, but I basically wrote Building Tomorrow to answer that question: what should we actually do? So then the obvious question from that is, so how does Building Tomorrow, my book, answer the question, what should we actually do? So the first thing is that it's full of real world examples of what people are actually doing, the kind of best practice examples of what people are doing to improve specific areas of the economic system. Because although, you know, the people at the top of governments and the top of big corporate businesses aren't interested in changing the system, there are loads of groups of people and organizations and so on who are dedicating themselves to building innovating new aspects of the system, doing transformative things to the current system, and, you know, making specific areas of the system much better. So I basically looked for all of those and pulled together the best ones I could, and the best ones I could find, the most practical ones. And I described them, yeah, using real world examples. And I kind of aimed for explaining them clearly and in enough detail that readers can see how and when to apply them. So it's not a kind of how-to book going through every last, you know, instruction manual kind of style, but it's a kind of narrative book describing things. But the idea is that when having read the book, you can see when each of the things in the book are applicable and what you might be able to put into practice yourself, use in your own life, in your business or your community, or if you're in local government, there are things for local government, and so on and so forth. And then kind of have them as options in your toolbox. And then clearly to actually do them, you'd probably want to do more like detailed research on the specific mechanics kind of thing. And then another aspect of what I've been going for with the book is readability, clarity, and inclusiveness. So it's not kind of confrontational or abrasive. And I don't mention, so I look on the book as describing a new system that will hopefully replace or many parts of a new system that will hopefully replace the capitalist system. But I don't actually mention the idea of replacing capitalism in the book, because lots of people seem to get a bit worked up by that one. So I thought it was probably best not to mention that and just to do it on the slide and be like, well, this is a better way of doing things. And then they'll be like, oh, whoops, we don't have capitalism anymore. And I also do it with the minimum amount of jargon. Someone did point out to me the other day that for some people, words like stakeholders are kind of jargony. So there are occasional words like that, but you know, the absolute minimum of that kind of thing to make it as readable. I think basically any kind of intelligent and interested reader should be able to understand the book. And then the other big part of it is the actual content. So what is in the book? So I've organized the book around 6 organizational technologies. So organizational technologies being systems and processes and institutions that we use to organize society. So they're not physical things, but they are technologies insofar as they're things that people develop invent, innovate, and we use them as tools to, do things we want to do, like organize society. And so what kind of organizations, so in order to choose decide which technologies went in the book, that I had, it went up and down the numbers that I was thinking I was going to put in and what I was going to put in that. But I realized they needed to have 3 criteria. So the first thing is that they needed to be practically and realistically possible to implement in the current circumstances. And a major circumstance is who's going to do it. Because a lot of what you hear about of ideas and possibilities, and for example, Jason Hickel, he's got really good ideas about the problems with the system and where we want to go in that, but he always goes on and on about these government policies that, if they brought in universal basic services, if they blah blah blah, but that's all asking the government to do things, right? And we can do that till we're blue in the face, but the government's not going to do that. And even the opposition party, at least in the UK, is at the moment very unlikely to do those kind of things, right? So that's not practically and realistically possible. But first of all, there are the small groups of people who are dedicated to making improvements and finding the really good improvements. And then there's also millions of people, globally speaking, millions of people who passionately want to avert the environmental crisis. And a lot of those people recognize that in order to do so, we need to transform the system. So what is practically and realistically possible is giving those people the ideas of how they can do it, what they can do to transform the system to avert the environmental crisis. Just like Jane was saying, it's all about the how. There's so many people who want to sort things out, and it's understanding how to do it. So my book is basically aimed at giving those motivated people the ideas and tools with which to change the system themselves, without having to persuade or rely on the people who don't want to. So not having to, persuade all businesses to suddenly get better. It's just those businesses that want to. There are really solid ways of restructuring the business so to enable it to have much more positive impact. And that I also include in the book strategies for then spreading these innovations across society by, first doing them and then, kind of transformation strategies, basically, but practical ones. And then the second thing is the second criteria. The first one is be practically and realistically possible. And the second one is that they need to be powerful enough to actually transform the system. So the technical way of thinking about this is it's about finding leverage points. So the great systems thinker, Donella Meadows, has written an amazing essay that's available on the internet that talks about system change and leverage points. And leverage points are places in the system where a relatively small change creates a cascade of changes throughout the system. But the ones that I kind of approach, I think are a subset of leverage points. And the way I think about it, it's not quite so technical, but it's going to the source. So they kind of go to the source of the problem and change that to enable things downstream, as it were. So to give an example, one of the technologies, I'll go through the technologies in a moment. And one of them is about businesses. It's the Future Guardian model. And because clearly, the business sector is a massive part of the economy, and they both currently, a lot of businesses are causing a lot of problems, and they have the potential, because they're so powerful and big, to have a much more positive impact. And there are, of course, lots of businesses know this, and there are various policies that businesses are kind of in vogue. For example, net zero. Going net zero is a very in vogue policy, and it's clearly a positive thing, right? It's decreasing environmental impact. But because virtually all businesses are defined as being profit maximizing, although they're wanting to go net zero, a lot of them are making claims but not really doing much, just straight up greenwashing kind of style. And a lot of them are doing things, excuse me, but using more offsets or specifically doing the things that kind of allow them to say that they're good, but still having loads of other externalities because they have to worry about their profits all the time and like maximizing their profits. They're not allowed to do nearly as much as they might want to. And then another example is the 4-day working week. That's kind of less big, but it's also in vogue to an extent. And it's, again, a very good policy. You know, it can give people a better quality of life, decrease consumerism, give more time for community projects and so forth. But when a company is profit maximizing, even if they do a 4-day working week, they're still trying to get as much as they can out of their employees in the 4 days. They're still not having a better effect on the environment. They're still generally causing problems in order to get profits. So going to the source is changing that issue of profit maximization. And that's what the Future Guardian model does. It changes it so that the business is run on behalf of all of its stakeholders in 6 groups, which includes the employees and the environment, as well as customers, commercial partners, investors, and community. So because the 2 of the stakeholders are the employees and the environment, a Future Guardian business who wants to act or is defined as acting on their behalf wants to go net zero, or even better than net zero, and decrease and real zero, and properly decrease its environmental impact. And it wants to do better things for the employees. So if the employees want a 4-day working week, then that's, you know, and it works with the other stakeholders and the kind of general situation of the business, then the business will want to do that. So it unlocks all of those individual policies that are downstream of the issue of what is the purpose of the business, how's it defined. So that's the second one, be powerful enough to actually transform the system. And then the third thing is that between the technologies, they are independent but complementary and cover the main areas of the economy. So the independent but complementary means that they can each be implemented on their own, but in doing one, they're all kind of aiming in the same direction. So in doing one, it makes it easier for the others to be implemented as well. So the opposite would be, if you need, like, in order to implement one, you need to implement another, then that makes it much harder to get any of them done because you need to kind of coordinate things so much. Whereas if by doing one of them, it makes it easier for another one to get done, then that enables momentum to be built and a kind of snowball effect to swing the whole economy. And then, yeah, they cover the main areas of the economy. So, well, the main areas they cover are the frameworks that guide our kind of thoughts and actions, excuse me, our businesses and organizations, and the monetary and financial systems. And it needs to be, ultimately, in order to actually transform the system, we do need to transform all of the areas of the system, because if we just do one of them, say improving business or changing the goal from economic growth, but we don't change the other areas of the system, then that new part is just going to be kind of clashing with the rest of the economy, and it's not going to kind of unlock all the possibility of a transformative, well, just a new system. And I've, excuse me. And I ordered the chapters in that order. So the first 2 chapters are on the frameworks that guide us. The second 2 are on our businesses and organizations. And the third 2 are on the monetary and financial systems. And I ordered it in that way because this helps to build up a picture of the new system as you read through the book, along with, of course, all of the examples, so showing how we can do it as we go through. And then in the conclusion, I bring them all together and describe the new system that, or parts of the new system that, if we implement all of these technologies, what the new system might look like, which is a truly different way of designing the economy. So the next bit is, what are the actual organizational technologies? So now I'll give a kind of overview of each of them. There's a lot in the book, so it is it's just a quick overview of each of them, and then in the discussion, of course, you can ask me more about the different parts. So the first one is the donut, which I guess most of you have probably heard of the donut now. It's quite famous, invented by Kate Raworth in 2011. And it's a replacement for the societal goal of economic growth, with a new goal of, which can be summarized in a sentence, of aiming to meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. And this can be drawn as the needs of all are like basics of like health, education, food, social networks, and so on, that everyone should have, you know, a basic level of all of those kind of things. And then within the means of the living planet means that collectively we don't overshoot the planetary boundaries, such as causing climate change, biodiversity loss, messing up the nutrient cycles, and those kind of things. And this can be drawn as a donut. So the inner ring is the social foundation, and the outer ring is the ecological ceiling. And the aim is to get inside the donut. And that's why it's called the donut, and donut economics. So, and in the chapter, so it was invented in 2011, but it's kind of moved forward quite a lot since then. And there are people putting the donut into action, trying to get inside the donut at lots of different scales. There are people looking at it on the global scale, and countries are starting to use it a little bit. And then there's loads going on at the level of kind of cities and communities, and also businesses. They've got a policy for businesses, and they're working on that as well. So in the chapter, after describing the donut and economic growth and all of that, I go through the kind of best examples of what people at each level are doing in order to put the donut into practice. And there's an organization, Donut Economics Action Lab, that's been founded by Kate Raworth, co-founded, and they're working with people at all these different levels. So I talk a bit about that as well. And if you're interested in the donut, as well as reading my book, check out Donut Economics Action Lab. They're really good. So then the second chapter is on the circular economy, which again, probably quite a few of you have heard, but just to give a quick summary, it solves the waste problem by redesigning how materials flow through the economy, so that rather than being like things being thrown away, the materials cycle around the economy endlessly and never need to be thrown away. And this kind of eliminates, if it works properly, it would eliminate the waste problem, because there would be no waste. It's kind of analogous to the nutrient cycles in nature that just cycle around and around. And again, this is something that people have been kind of working out how to do for the last kind of 20 years. Of course, recycling's the very basic level, but to really do a properly circular economy, it involves changing all the different aspects of the cycle. So business models, product design, consumer behavior, and so on. So in the chapter, I go through examples that show the main strategies that people use to get into the circular economy, building from basic strategies for individual products up to organizations that are kind of redesigning the entire business or kind of the supply chain ecosystem and seeding new business ecosystems in order to create a truly circular economy. So those are the two on frameworks. And then the next two are on businesses and organizations. So the first one's the Future Guardian model that I mentioned briefly earlier, that changes, it redefines the purpose of the business so that it actually includes a specific purpose that kind of describes the business's role in society. And the aim becomes to pursue that purpose while balancing and protecting the interests of 6 stakeholder groups. And this was invented by Riversimple by Hugo Spowers, Joel Getzendana, and Patrick Andrews. And actually, Gwyn's done lectures on the Future Guardian model for many years as well. And he's had some very key inputs into Riversimple itself as well. And it's being pioneered by Riversimple, and it's something that, so it's really quite revolutionary, has revolutionary potential for changing the way, like, the motivations of business. And it fits within the British company law. So businesses in this aspect are run under, or the law, relevant law is the Companies Act 2006, and the Future Guardian model fits within that. So there's no need to change the law in order for it to be done. And essentially business can take it on, at least in the UK, any business can take it on, so long as the owners decide to do it. So any other business that really, excuse me, that really wants to have a more positive effect on its stakeholders can just move to the Future Guardian model. And excuse me, sorry. And as such, I think it's got a strong potential for transforming the business sector over the next few years. And in the chapter, as well as describing the model and the positive effects it can have, and examples of things that companies do on behalf of their stakeholders, I describe how it can be applied in different areas. For example, utility companies, there's, you know, the kind of public-private dichotomy. Should they be public utilities or should they be private? And there are issues with both sides of that. And the Future Guardian model potentially gives a third kind of middle way that could work much better, because it does have the profit motive, but it's also run on behalf of the stakeholders. And in that case, those would, they already include the community. And in that case, you'd have a government stakeholder as well. So it could be, you know, a much better way than just the private and public that we have at the moment. And I also include transition strategies for how it could be spread across the economy, across the business sector. And then the next one is, that's also on businesses and organizations, is on regenerative organizations. So these are organizations that are, their organizational structure is designed so that it regenerates local economies while connecting them through global networks. And I go through 4 organizations, which are each quite different, but they all, the 4 organizations are Fab Labs, which is a network of makerspaces, and there's thousands of them around the world. Transition Network, which is a community, a network of communities looking to do their own projects and build up and help their communities decarbonize and increase social cohesion. Bendigo Community Banks, which is a banking network, and Open Source Ecology, which is an open source organization building machines, basically. So they're all very different organizations, and they have organizational structures that are also quite different and are designed to help them forward their goals. So I describe the organizations, but I also explain at the beginning and end of the chapter how these might be, or that these kind of structures can be applied much more widely, and either the specific structures themselves just applied to similar kinds of organizations, or being adapted, or 2 or more of them combined. And so an example of the way that they can be kind of just used, a very similar structure can be used. So at the beginning, or in the beginning section, I describe each of the organizations in a single sentence that's generalized to show how it can be applied in different areas. And for the Transition Network, the sentence is that it was founded by passionate people seeking innovative solutions within a new paradigm. And that exact same sentence describes the Donut Economics Action Lab. They are also passionate people seeking innovative solutions within a new paradigm, the paradigm being the donut. And the organizational structures of Transition Network and DEAL are both very similar, and they're both really good organizations that are working really well. So that shows that these kind of structures can be applied much more widely to organizations that follow those kind of things. So anyway, I go through it and I'm explicitly describing the organizations and saying, hopefully more people will put these into action in their organizations. And I think ultimately there's the potential for this to, these kind of structures to become dominant rather than the currently dominant structure of the corporate centralized hierarchical model. So those are the 2 on businesses and organizations. And then, as you can see, there is quite a lot in the book. So it's I'm trying to go through it as kind of reasonably as I can, you know, in terms of explanation and that. And the last 2 are on the monetary and financial systems. So the first one, this is a very technical chapter. It's called the sovereign money system. And it's actually about it redefines how money is created. So I won't go into the details now, but basically at the moment, money is created as interest-bearing debt by private banks. And that's how the Bank of England describes this. It says in England, 97% of money is created by private banks as interest-bearing debt. And this is basically causes a lot of problems. It is a driver of economic growth, and the housing price bubbles, asset bubbles, financial crises, like even the what's he called? Adair Turner, the head of the UK's Financial Services Authority around the time of the financial crisis, he said in 2012 that, okay, I can't remember the exact quote, but that the financial crisis was caused by the fact that they didn't restrain public banks' creation of money and debt. So, even top people, and this is something that the sovereign money system basically overcomes this and changes the way that money is created so that it's not created as debt and it's created in the public interest, which gives a much more stable financial system. And it also gives governments way more tools to help us navigate our transition to a decarbonized society and kind of support communities when there are natural disasters and so on. And this is the one technology that needs national governments to put it into action, because it's about national currency. So that's the kind of smallest level. National governments and central banks just have to be the people who do it, right? But it can be done by any country without needing international agreement. So, for example, Iceland and Switzerland have both, in the last few years, seriously considered putting into action a sovereign money system, and they haven't needed to go and try and persuade the UK or somewhere like that to do it as well. Excuse me. So it's a way in which a small country could have quite an effect on the global system by basically they're scared of being the first. Like, for example, Switzerland, there was a referendum about it, but the Central Bank of Switzerland actually campaigned against it, saying that they didn't think it was a good idea because it would basically be an experiment because no one's done it before. So as soon as one country does it, then that shows that it stops it being an experiment, like that, or they are the experiment. So as long as they do well at it, then other countries have much more confidence to do it. And then if a few small countries have done it by the time of the next financial crisis, that means it will be an option that the big economies like the UK, or the economies with the big financial systems like the UK and the States, can have as an option on the table, kind of thing. So yeah, it's a way that a small country could have a big global effect. And then the final chapter is on complementary currencies. So these are also on the monetary system, but these focus on local level monetary systems, and they're ways of designing new types of money to solve specific economic problems. So to give some examples, one example that is relatively well known are local currencies that are only used in a local area by local businesses, and they help to build up the local economy. But there are other ones that are like token currencies and mutual credit systems and time banks and a whole bunch of other complementary currencies. And in this chapter, I go through, again, examples, because there's been loads and loads of complementary currencies all around the world, and there are right now. So I go through examples, kind of, exemplar type examples of each of the main types of currency to show when they should be used, how they can be put into action, and so that, having read the chapter, they can become a part of the toolbox of people, community organizations, local councillors, and so forth. So those are the 6 chapters, and then, as I say, in the conclusion, I bring them together and I describe in a reasonable amount of detail a new model for material development with regional circularity and regenerative organizational structures. And then, in a slightly more broad brush way, how the financial system could change and kind of interact with that, and some examples of, truly new possibilities that come from that. But that's all a bit complicated to try and explain here without going through loads of details of the actual book, of the contents. So I think I'll leave that for the moment. And to find out about that, you'll have to read the book, or possibly try and wheedle it out of me in the Q&A part. So summary of the book.
Thank you, Paddy. That's an incredible summary. I was reading it, and it was kind of, I could actually go through it, and actually I was kind of following it as you went through, having, read it through, and that was a really useful summary. Thank you so much. I think one of the things that, there's two things that really struck me there, around when you were saying about the experiment, the Swiss, not the government, the Swiss financial system saying, oh, no, we can't be the first because it's an experiment. And I think one of the things that really struck me reading it was the kind of the hope, the optimism, and the confidence that came from kind of going, well, here's an example of this working. Here's an example of this working. And, having all the examples, and particularly, looking at Wales as somewhere where, this is not a country that's like a radical, crazy country. And yet all the way through, you were going, you could read the book and you go, well, this is happening in Wales. There's a company doing this in Wales. There's a city doing this in Wales. And that, for me, felt a really positive way forward, that those, you could just see it all there. And I think the other thing that made this really feel doable for me was, again, you spoke about it, and the utilities example was a classic, where I think in it, you were actually, I think the word you used in the book, you were saying, you said, for example, in some areas of the economy, such as public transport and utilities, opinion is generally divided as to whether they should be private companies or they should be owned and run by the state. And that just felt such a gentle, unconfrontational way of saying, something that could be really quite explosive and polarizing and divisive. And again, it felt that one of the things that made it very doable was that it could appeal across political divides, and it could appeal no matter where your own framework and your own personal ideology and values are from the beginning. And I guess that made me curious in terms of, how have you seen this received from business community, from economists, from people not like us, as it were?
Yeah, well, it's still reasonably early days, because as I'm kind of outside the establishment, I'm not like a professor or anything like that. It's been like it's step by step getting it read by more and more people. But I actually, about a week ago, just over a week ago, I think it was, I had a very strong endorsement on that side of things, because it got chosen by Martin Wolf, the chief economics commentator at the Financial Times, as one of his best books of 2023 so far. So I think that's he's obviously like right in the establishment, and he is actually, and I think this was my into getting him to read it kind of thing, he is an advocate of the sovereign money system. So he's interested in new ideas kind of thing, and he just does a little paragraph, and he says it's important to consider radical new ideas such as Kate Raworth's donut economics. This book builds on that, and he does say it's reasonable to doubt that it's feasible to put into action in a relevant timescale, but it's also easy to see that this kind of stuff's good. I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it's a good idea, basically. So yeah, I mean, he's really in the heart of the establishment kind of thing, and he likes it. And yeah, obviously he might doubt that it can all be put into action, but lots of it can, kind of thing. And he obviously recognizes that it's a good way of redesigning the economy kind of thing. So I think, yeah. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. As Paddy and I discovered, Paddy and I could sit and talk about this for the next hour. We're not going to. I know that there's obviously a lot to think about and take in there. And I wondered, just to open it up, has anyone else got anything they would like to add into this at this point? I'm just going to go in. If you see hands and I don't, yeah. Jill, hi.
Hello, Jane. Nice to see you. Paddy, forgive me if I'm wrong, but you spoke a lot about businesses. It was very, very corporate focused. You gave them as an example right the way through. and you also spoke about changing the dominance of the corporate hierarchical model, which, you know, I couldn't agree with you more. You didn't seem to bring anywhere the power of small businesses, or talk about them and how actually the small businesses often work in a very different way. It's not about, you know, it's not about shareholders and maximizing profit, and how they can be part of that movement of changing the societal structure that we want, and actually making those small businesses more prominent than the corporates. I mean, most people don't know the percentage of small businesses, and people get bored because I say this almost every time I come on, because my passion is small businesses and the whole sustainability agenda. But it just didn't seem to fit in anywhere, Paddy. So can you tell me how you see that might be part and parcel of the solution, supporting small businesses?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, because I know I obviously trying to fit it all into a small time, and I do find, I don't know, I quite often, it just seems to be quite an easy example, or a useful example to use talk about when I'm talking about the future guardian model in various bits. So it kind of became a bit of a theme. But no, I really think that small businesses are very good. And yeah, so the profit maximizing is obviously much more relevant to corporate businesses. But so one of the things, and something I kind of mentioned a bit, is that there are loads of organizations and small businesses and so forth who are doing, you know, as much good as they can, kind of thing, but they're pushing against the tide of the, you know, they're kind of swimming against the flow of the overall economic system, in order to do as much good as they can. It's kind of hard, basically, right? So it's kind of about changing the structures in order to enable those positive things. And for example, the regenerative organization networks are ways of, or can be used as ways of connecting small businesses, and so creating a kind of collaborative development dynamic to enable them to improve their impact and connect with others who are having positive impact, and kind of share their innovations and experiences in order to kind of move forward. So I mean, the overall system, and the system I describe in the conclusion, actually is virtually entirely about networked small businesses and distributed manufacturing and local regional things. But the way to get there is or a large part of the way to get there is changing those structures and putting in place the kind of networks that enable them to thrive. And
if I could add on to that as well, Jill, because I was actually delighted when I saw you come on the call. For those that don't know, I'm sure Jill will not mind a very quick plug for the Organisation for Responsible Businesses, which Jill,
thank you.
But one of the things that Paddy talks about within the future guardianship model is, you know, this idea of having kind of future, you have basically a custodian, but all your various stakeholders, and you're saying, you know, actually it talks about the fact that that's really hard for a small business. You can't have this like 6-person board, but it says, you know, so while a full future guardian model might not be directly applicable to small businesses, an adapted version could be. For example, a non-profit umbrella organization could be set up to help a membership of small businesses in a specific area. And of course, Jill, you'll know that absolutely jumped out at me, because it just felt like such a natural evolution and fit for something like the ORB that, you know, it just really hit home for me how something like that future guardian model can transcend beyond big business and corporate.
Yeah, it's very much our approach, really. And it's not what we call it, but it is. You know, and Jane will know as much as anyone, and Gwen too, that I will even sort of go with net zero and say, no, we have to look at everything holistically, and you know, which is that approach that you're talking about. You know, in thinking of everyone. You know, the planet, the environment, all aspects of the environment, your people, the community, you know, everyone that you deal with. Yeah, interesting.
Awesome, yeah.
I think also, Jill, the Future Guardian model that Paddy talks about was actually created by River Simple, which the last I heard, it's still 15 people, but they've had that model from the very beginning as the design model. And the thing that Paddy was saying also about complementarity, I was just going through the list of those 6, how many of those models are actually naturally embedded in River Simple's model, and it's certainly the first 3, just by the mentality of the founders. And that's the beauty about the small businesses, that the founders are quite often the board of directors, and it's their passion, their values that drives the design models. And that has really emerged from a small company. I couldn't imagine a company the size of Unilever choosing to go to an FMG model unless there were companies like River Simple who are making it succeed. They want the small companies to experiment before it spreads, a bit like the sovereign currency model as well.
Yeah, I just add to that while River Simple are currently small, they are planning on becoming big. So the thing with the Future Guardian model is, because there's as Jane mentioned, that there's a custodian for each stakeholder plus some stewards. So for small businesses, an umbrella organization, a network organization, I'm not too sure what organization it is that evidently Jill's involved in, an organization kind of like that. But yeah, a network organization that would have the custodians that could essentially be the custodians for a group of businesses, so that each business doesn't have to have the whole model, is just definitely possible, you know. Like, so it can be, and I run through kind of how it can be applied in loads of different situations like that. I just happened to use the example of the utilities rather than small businesses when I was explaining just now. There's also a question on the chat from Jan. How can people change the system if they live relatively outside it and have no influence on any of its parts? So there's loads of examples of community organizations, for example, such as the Donor Economics Action Lab and the Transition Network. And open source ecology is one that it's like kind of a lot of it's online, so you don't even need it to be in your community kind of thing. And they're all things that really like encourage and enable people to join them and to create new organizations within their own community. So I think the first step would be to look at find out whether there are like groups, donut groups or transition groups in your area. And then if not, then just start one and get the people who are interested going and start one in your area, because that's how it grows, kind of thing. And then the other thing is that people who are currently outside the system, that's an opportunity to, or depending on their exact situation in life, but may have an opportunity to start a new kind of project or something, right? So one of the things, the attitudes that I think is very important for creating this transformation, is for people in a position to be able to do this, have the attitude of, if you see something that you want to exist and doesn't exist, then make it happen. So I kind of first, actually my partner pointed out that this is a kind of different take on Gandhi's be the change you want to see in the world. But I thought of like, got this strand, as it were, from my friends who are entrepreneurs. And when we were in our 20s, various of them started companies. And the reason they did it, the kind of starting point, was that they wanted something to exist and it didn't. So they made it happen. And that was within the entrepreneurial mindset. But exactly the same thing is true within the economic transformation mindset. So, you know, if you think, oh, it would be great that there's a network for improving food security, or a network for, I don't know, decarbonizing a specific thing, or for creating regional circularity or whatever, then start that thing, you know, like find other people who are interested in it and go for it and make it your project, kind of thing. Yeah, so I'd say those are a couple of ways of of moving forward if you're currently outside the system, as it were.
And I think as well with the second part of that, with the, do you know any cities or bioregions which are applying change as a whole systems approach or as a model? And I think what, Paddy, you'll have researched these far more than I have, but I think what I found fascinating, last week I was on a conference which was creating a well-being economy in Alberta. Now, for those who know Alberta, it's basically Texas on steroids, and it was just, I had to attend it just for the name, if nothing else. But they were bringing in so many different examples. And I think what struck me was the crossover between what was happening in different cities. And it all came back to the same basic principles. And so I think, I think you would, if you said who's doing it at a whole systems level, they'd probably say, no, I'm doing, the city of Nanaimo is doing a well-being economy, or this city's using donut economics, or, Wales has implemented, the well-being commissioner and things like that. But actually, it is all happening. And it's funny because where I actually live, Jan, I was kind of reading this, and I've kind of had this idea that I live in this sort of place that's kind of like what life could be like after post-growth or whatever. And I was kind of reading this, and it was just this idea, and I read this and I'm going, oh, we've got a transition network, and it's a success. I mean, it employs 7 people. It's not just a few people sitting around. It's a massive part of the local economy. We have a local currency. We have fab labs. And it really struck me that if you said to anyone on the island, are you doing what you're doing? Would be like, yeah, we're just a place with a few creative people. And yet, when you look at this, you realize that actually it's happening without people realizing it's happening, and it becomes its own catalyst for. It's a system. So, you implement at one level and, you tip things at all different points in the system. So I think that was, for me, that we're probably one of the problems we've got is we actually don't always realize how much influence we do have and how much change is happening and how close we are. I mean, I think when I kind of started, summarizing what I thought, and I've lost my post-it, but it was just this feeling that reading the book, it felt we're at the cusp because everything's happening. It's all there, and it's just fitting the pieces of the puzzle together. Does that sound fair, Paddy?
Yes, totally. And that's great. All the stuff that's going on in Salt Spring. And I'll just add to that, in terms of a couple of cities there are loads around the world doing loads of good things, but a couple that are really kind of pushing things forward and are quite big cities are Amsterdam. So they've done the kind of best example of a donut being put into action in a city in Amsterdam, and they've done a city portrait, which I use as an example in the book, and is one of the main ones on the Deal website and what have you. And then another city is Barcelona. That's more on the makerspace kind of side of things. They've got loads of things going on the kind of local material cycles and people making their own things and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of innovation going on in Barcelona. So I'd say those are 2 to kind of check out. And I think there's Fab Labs has also got a kind of a new project called Fab Cities, which is worth checking out as well for that kind of localizing production and that kind of side of things.
Alan, I hope you're still there. This sounds very familiar to a lot of the work that you're involved with and you're seeing happen at the grassroots level in Hull and Humberside area.
Yes, and and thank you, Paddy, for coming on BBC Eco Time on my show and talking to this community about it, because it was really good, and we got a lot of positive comments from that. Yeah, and yes, there is an awful lot going on around the Humber in our area around Hull, and it does. I think the main difficulty we face and I wondered if it's that common, is just, it's about the paradigms that you mentioned, about doing things in a different paradigm, and it's about agreeing elements of that paradigm across the stakeholders and the establishment, and that is acknowledging the same map, the same risks, the same potential outcomes that are potentially negative. So for change to happen, there has to be an acknowledgement of the current path will not go well if it's continued as it is. But the details of that are very hard to agree, as it's based on which model you're looking at, which evidence you're looking at, which map everybody agrees on. And because I'm working across 4 local authorities on either side of the Humber, obviously that's a lot of agreement. But there's massive room for things to change, and there's huge independent push from lots of people turning climate anxiety into action and looking at different economic models, with our Hull and East Riding Time Bank, for example, and others. But I think it's there is a lack of agreement about the reason, what it is that we're trying to avoid. I think everybody knows we're trying to achieve something better, but it's the motivation that comes from what we're trying to avoid. I think it's hard to agree on. How's that fit with others?
Yeah, that's good. So to be honest, I kind of like, in terms of like the problems and what have you, I kind of focused, I found it quite, there's so many things written about the problems with the current system and different types of problems and what have you, that I kind of focused on. I ran through the problems in the kind of broad brush way of, you know, obviously the environment's going bad in all sorts of different ways. And then I described it as that we need to change the economic system so that it helps rather than hinders the kind of, you know, positive project. Because the system currently is, you know, something that everything has to push against. All of these kind of small projects have to push against. So yeah, I kind of like go for the solutions and describing the solutions to enable people to move forward. And I mean, you're obviously like deeply embedded in all of these kind of things, so you'll know much more. But I kind of partly feel like, and again, this is maybe like, you know, people with all of their kind of incentives and motivations and what have you might turn out to be different than this, but giving a positive solution and positive ways forward, then it doesn't matter too much what exactly the issue is, what the thing you're trying to avoid, when the thing that we're aiming for is better than whichever of the things that we're trying to avoid, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
Sorry, I was going to say, one of the lines, Paddy, you used in the book was, there is more to life than avoiding catastrophe. And I absolutely love that. It's like that's one that you kind of need up on your wall, you know, for those moments when you're like,
Yeah, absolutely.
I am conscious of people's time. We are down to come on for till past. So we will carry on the conversation because there's clearly far more to be said. But for those that do need to rush off, please don't feel that you need to stay out of politeness. We do understand that people have busy lives. I wonder if I could be very cheeky and put someone on the spot. Gavin, I wonder if you would be just kind of add in a little bit about what you're doing and how this, if you could add some of kind of how this resonates with you on the basis of what you're doing. Most people on the call probably aren't aware of Reaction Collective, but I think it's quite an interesting one to add into the mix we're talking about. If you don't mind, and feel free to say, just go away.
I have a little one here who might chip in. Yeah, so I live out in the south of France, in the French Alps. I guard at the minute. And I've been working in the ski industry for 15 years. I originally grew up in Sheffield from a climbing background. A background that I say is quite frugal. Like when we went on Climbing trips when we were younger is definitely done on a budget. Skiing is the polar opposite of that. Skiing is for the mega rich, and I sort of spent 15 years kind of getting absorbed by that model. Really, I ended up owning 2 ski shops out here, and then 5 years ago, started to address the environmental impact of them shops. Realised, and this is this is a question I have for you actually, Paddy. Realised that I think that is an impossible model to change. So working in a ski shop in the French Alps, selling ski boots and products at the top of the mountain, there just isn't a way of turning that into a project or a business or an organization that is positive for the planet. I don't think that's possible, and I think there's a lot of organizations in the current model that just is impossible for them to do. And so what we did here is we started not for profit. We opened up a small community space that is focused on keeping kit in action. We do lots of workshops for the local community, teach people how to repair, how to look after their products better, to service them. We've got quite a good program of free workshops that we now run throughout the summer. And then a year ago, was speaking on the podcast and sort of said that this model works in our community. It's self-funded. It's actually just funded completely by waste, and we have 3 full-time members of staff now, and yeah, we've not had a penny put into it from the very start. To be honest, we've just sold the shit that people are throwing away. And we've also opened another space out here, which is about 1,000 square meters, which has a fab lab in. It has a space to repair your car. It has a space to use a community wood workshop, a metal workshop. It's got secondhand sports gear. It's got sewing workshops. And we started to talk about scale. And so the approach we've taken is to form something called the Reaction Collective, which is a collective of organizations that are trying to keep outdoor sports gear in action. We now have 35 members across the globe. And what those members do is they adhere to a manifesto we made, and that is firstly that you don't sell new stuff. You're focused on secondhand, and you're focused on repair, and you're focused on introducing the circular economy. That you are focused on sharing your skills, building a community, engaging people. It's inclusive, and essentially all those organizations are introducing circular models into outdoor sports. So there's what I believe are the models that will succeed is stuff like peer-to-peer lending. So peer-to-peer lending of tents is a great model. It's part of the Reaction Collective. That's an organization called Tent Share. So you can list a tent on there, you can gain some revenue from it, or you can rent a tent off someone else in your community. And we don't all need to own lots of tents, and we don't need to own a specific tent for each occasion. So lots of sort of organizations like that, and it's working really well. Like I would back up what Jane said there. Like here where I am in the French Alps, there's a massive change, and like it's hard to necessarily know that because it's not in the news and it's not written about every day and it's not talked about enough. But on the ground here, helped by French legislation, we're starting to see a change for sure. In our sector, the legislation that's helping us is an extended producer responsibility law, and other laws that are coming in, like there's a carbon labeling coming in on clothing this year. So any company that sells a new garment in France will have to list the carbon impact and the environmental impact of that garment. So yeah, I would back up a lot of what the conversation has said here, and that there is a hell of a lot of change happening. I agree with a lot of the things you say, Paddy. I would say there's a hell of a lot of organizations and businesses in the world that cannot become circular. I just don't think they can do it. I mean, I'm talking about fast fashion, even sports equipment's part of the fast fashion movement now. Every year there's a different color, there's a different model, there's a different fabric, there's a different technical aspect to it. So yeah, for us to go through the transition, it's going to be, I'd say, fairly messy, but I'm fairly hopeful. There's loads going on, so I'll back Jane up. Sorry, I have to tell you, I spoke for ages.
No, as I say, it just really struck me that, you know, everything we were saying resonated so much about what I kind of know about Reaction Collective, but mainly through Heather. But yeah, it just really struck me that, again, it's just that it is happening. It's happening on the ground. And it's not, I think, again, where what Paddy was saying is, with Alan and with yourself, we're not talking, it's moving away from this fluffy do-good. It's economy, it's profit, it's, you know, it's functional, it works, it supports us as humans. And I guess for me, that's what I took from it.
Yeah, and what I'd say, something that Paddy's sort of written in it, Harry's written his book, is like, for myself personally, I'm not really interested. It's been quite relieving, because I'm not really interested in the problem. Of course, I know the problem's monumentally bad, and I have 2 young children, and it is frightening and it's worrying for sure. But like, I've gone beyond that. I don't really care about that anymore. I've gone on to moving and thinking about, like, what can I do about it? What can our community do about it? And sort of stopped caring really about whether the capitalist system is going to fail or when it's going to fail, because that's not what's important. I feel like what's important now is to build the new. So I just don't care about it anymore, in a sense. So in a way, it's like, well, what can I build that's new, is useful, that is going to be positive in the future? Because the old will collapse. So do I need to concern myself with that? And I've kind of moved into a space which is a lot easier to live in, to be honest.
Yeah. That is absolutely awesome, Gavin. It's great to hear about all of those amazing projects you're doing. And especially, as you say, you were, until 5 years ago, whatever it was, you were embedded in, like, the ski industry is, you know, it's for rich people. It involves a lot of, well, because people travel to it, particularly, a lot of climate problems. It's, you know, it's clearly on the problem side rather than the solution side. And to kind of recognize that and then find a positive way of moving to doing all of those projects you were saying sound absolutely brilliant, and then beginning to scale it, it's just like absolutely awesome. So thank you very much. That's great.
On a note of scale, I think you can scale mega quick if you start to work as a collective. Like,
yes,
if
absolutely.
you go incredibly fast, it doesn't matter. Like, we don't need to feel like a lack of power, because you can do this at such speed.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like what you're doing, the collective side of it, is one of the regenerative organization, like the ones that I go through. So I mean, it might be that like it might be that you've already got it sorted anyway, to be honest, but it might be that there are ideas within the regenerative organizations part that would help. But also it's I had so many ideas while you were talking there. So so on the thing you were saying just now about the capitalist systems, there's loads of areas that are just basically bad and are going to need to go, right? And bad in terms of environmental impact, what have you. And the capitalist system as a whole is kind of going to need to go. And as you say, collectives and networks can scale very rapidly, right? So a big part of the kind of change we need, I imagine that things are going to get pretty hairy in the 2030s, basically, based on what I read about the environmental, you know, climate change and what have you. And so there's the two sides to it. One is people recognizing that they really do need to change. And a lot of people are working in areas that the equivalent of your ski shop are going to have to go, right? So there's one side of it of people understanding that and finding positive ways forward. So you are a brilliant example of discovering that and then finding a positive way forward. And that might be something that is another way, you're probably quite busy already, but another route towards helping with the transition is helping people who are in that kind of situation, because a lot of people are just basically burying their heads in the sand and trying to carry on as long as they can. And then in terms of the transition, okay, so I'm just trying to think which idea to pull in. So you mentioned about fast fashion, and that's, again, excuse me, an area that's basically very problematic, right? But clothing isn't exactly problematic. Clothing is a very necessary part of life, right? And it's actually something, I use the clothing industry as a specific example of how we can redesign create new systems. If that's the kind of basis in the conclusion. And I take as a starting point, well, Fab Labs as the network regenerative structure, and then T-Mill. I don't know if you've heard of T-Mill, but they're they've basically, it was a couple of lads in the Isle of Wight. It sounds like you have, but I'll explain for other people as well. A couple of lads in the Isle of Wight in the early 2000s, in their 20s, wanted sustainable and nice clothing. So they initially, sourced sustainably and all of that, but they realized they needed to get better than that. So they went for circular, working out how to get t-shirt cotton into the circular economy. And the problem with t-shirt cotton is that the more times it gets recycled, the fibers get shorter. So it can only be recycled, traditionally speaking, a small number of times. So they actually rejigged their machines to make the t-shirts, so that they made, I think they're slightly thicker t-shirts so that the smaller fibers don't matter. And they've now got a genuinely circular way of making t-shirts, and they haven't found the limit to how many times the t-shirts can be remade, kind of thing. And they, as they say in some interview, they started with 200 quid in a garden shed, and obviously a lot of determination as well. And the clothing industry, there's loads of, like, for example, denim. At the moment, it gets recycled in inverted commas, but it generally gets put into carpets and things like that, and it's like downcycled, so it can't really be recycled. It's not circular, it's just gets downcycled. But the denim industry is worth, like, I did get the statistic, it's like $90 billion a year or something ridiculous, right? So there's a massive amount of resources. So really, we just need some of those resources in the hands of some motivated, determined people to working out how to make it circular. There's no reason to think we can't make all of those kind of things circular, right? And then in terms of the redesigning of the creating a new clothing economy, effectively, right, or clothing like industry. So if you have adapt the T-Mill circular clothing factory to a small scale, so one factory covers a city or a town or an island or whatever it is, right, or a region. And then once you've got the factory and enough cotton to fill the whole material cycle, so there's cotton in the factories, people are wearing clothes, there's t-shirts in the shops, and each of the kind of bits of the cycle are filled, then obviously there'll still be some leakage, but the overall dynamic becomes that place is essentially self-sufficient in terms of t-shirts. It doesn't need to import more cotton, apart from very small amounts, but the dynamic is self-sufficiency. And then it just needs to keep its factory going and keep all the parts of it kind of cycling around. And so once you've got, if you then set up a network of loads of, like as in kind of equivalent to the Fab Labs network, but instead of maker spaces, you've got clothing factories, and they share their developments and the clothing they make and everything on a cloud, on an intranet, whatever, then that creates the collaborative development dynamic. So each area and each factory can do its own thing, but it shares what it's doing, and it shares its experience with everyone. So everyone can gain from that accumulated knowledge and experience. And they're all self-sufficient in terms of their materials. So then, like, the big issue, which I think basically is going to need culture change, is getting the capital, because it's just absolutely essential that the concentration of capital is decreased, right? And if a capitalist funds, say, because this thing could be put into this kind of system, could then, a factory could be built even in somewhere really poor like Mozambique, and if they've got the factory and the cotton and what have you, then they can like tag straight into the global knowledge database and leapfrog development, and suddenly have much better development that's locally self-sufficient, and they can do it themselves. But the issue is getting the capital to build the system, right? And if the capitalist wants his money back and profit and all of that, then he's still extracting. So, and normally it works, obviously, that the extraction is covered by the clothes being sold into the global economic system instead of just being used locally, and locals just get their wages. So it's kind of subverting that, and a part of it is dealing with the capital. But yeah, I think there's, and as you're saying, in terms of like the change of system, yeah, I do think capitalism is eventually going to break. I think it's going to get very hairy in the 2030s. But because these network organizations, it's like the information, and it's like, look, this is how it works, this is how you do it. All you have to do is do it in your area, so it can spread like more or less immediately. So I think what we really need to do on that side of things is get as much of the system, the new system ready, the networks ready and prepared and scalable and, you know, just really solid. And then I think it's going to be in the 2030s that things are going to get really bad. There's going to be like, you know, hunger in the West, I think it's probably what will do it, or God knows what it'll be. It could be a lot of different things, right? And then people will suddenly be like, oh my God, what do we do? Right. And we've got to be like, this is what you do. And because it's networks, they can then just do it as quickly as possible where they are as well, and kind of ease that transition.
Yeah, makes sense. So my experience with, because I guess the ski industry is quite a good model for this, because if you interact with the big brands in the ski industry, they know their industry is finished. You know, like they know we're not going to be skiing in 20 years time, so they already know that, and their reaction is to make as much money as quickly as possible, and that's the route they're going down. And so I think, like, my approach has been, well, I can't work with this industry because it's got no intention of changing, because it wants to make as much money as it can in the end. That capital is not available to us, so let's just try and build something that is as disruptive as possible, that's spread out as wide as possible, that does create something that hopefully becomes a new and functioning system that has real value for people and then for the planet. But interestingly, some of the brands as well have come to me this year and said, we are totally stuck, as in, we can't make our businesses any more sustainable because of the model we work with and the shareholder pressure. But we've got massive issues with supply line. We've got a massive issue with cost of living crisis. Like, there's a lot of pressure on these big brands, as it is anyway, that I see will happen, especially in the ski industry, within the next couple of years, not even into the, like, not within the 2030s, for example. I think within the next couple of years, we'll see masses of them fail because they've got really big structural issues. Sorry, I can see that Alan's got his hand up, so I'll stop talking.
Could I just say something just in reply to that quickly, and then Alan can get on after that. So the other side of it, so on that side of it, the Future Guardian model, which is the stakeholder-based model, I think, like, the issue is it's still a small thing, right? But if, for example, if there's a ski brand that wants to actually do better and find a way of kind of both decreasing its negative impacts and eventually winding down, but in a way that works for everyone, including the investors to the extent it can, then the Future Guardian model can do all of that, right? Because it's about acting on behalf of all of the stakeholders. It enables companies. It means that, so profit is one of the investors are one of the stakeholders, but so are like the environment and employees and all of that, right? And community. So profit is still important. It's still a factor, but not the only factor. The other things are equally important. It's just as important that it has a better environmental impact and a better impact in its local community, and it's like doesn't completely screw over its investors, kind of thing. And that means that a Future Guardian company could even decide to close itself, right? But in deciding to close itself, it would be like, well, we need to close within, say, 10 years, and we need to do so in a way that doesn't, like, if these kind of companies where they're just going and then they break, right? When they break, the investors lose everything as well, right? So they can suck whatever the profits they can out in the meantime, but then they lose everything. Whereas if you've got a plan, right, okay, we're going to wind down in 10 years time, then that can include kind of like getting a reasonable kind of return to investors without them sucking things out of everyone else first, and basically just balance all of those kind of sides of it. So the one, depending on the attitude of the investors and shareholders, the issue is that the power to make the changes, because it's changing the Articles of Association, the power to make those changes lies with the shareholders. So they have to accept ceding power in order to do that. But it could be something that could be like, well, look, it's going to go bust in 10 or 20 years. We can just do this in a decent way if we change to this model and work out how to do it, kind of thing. Then, yeah. Alan, do you want to say something?
Yeah, it's really good to hear about the Reaction Collective and what you're doing there, Gavin. It sounds fantastic. And I guess that Creative and Cultural Organisation, which is the sort of main one that I am based in Hull, is similar in many ways. And it's interesting to hear what you had to say, Paddy, as well, about the way that the team had built things up, because so we, unlike ski equipment, but similar in some ways. I mean, our thing is art supplies and exhibition supplies. So we have people bring in their makeup; it gets turned into recycled paint. We kind of make art supplies available to the people to the creatives who need them, and share the resources of exhibition walls, portable walls, that kind of thing, and make it so people can borrow those, so that there can be a creative, there can be a catalogue of creative resources really for everybody to use. But also people buy some of those recycled, recreated art supplies as well from the tiny little shop we have in the gallery. But everything is also done in meanwhile spaces. So we're on our 33rd disused shop at the moment that we're based from. And it was interesting what you said about capital and getting going. So we didn't have any capital to get going. What we did have was a load of art gear that we built ourselves. We built portable walls to do exhibitions outside and things like that. So we had stuff that we'd created. It was a sharing of abundance project, really. And so it's our 30th anniversary this year. We've never had any funding. We've never had any capital. We always have somehow we always seem to have just under £1,000 in the bank. I don't know how it seems to stay that way, but somehow it does. But we are able to keep going. The bit that in the model you were describing that we haven't done is the network effect of scaling that. We've not been able to scale. We haven't, but then again, we've not really tried. And maybe that would be a development for us, would be to scale and do it in other places as well. But one thing I can say about that system, and I'm sure Gavin will notice this as well, is it does give you a feeling of resilience. It is a more resilient model than a typical capitalist model. Even though we have only a very small amount of money in the bank, we do have a community of people who all have skills, and we're all volunteers. So we can share the abundance of our time as well and our skills together, and everybody benefits from it. But it would be good at some point to look at whether or not that could go to a system where people could be paid, because in the ideal new economy that you speak of, I would like to think that people, I mean, if it was absolutely brilliant, all food would be free and water would be free and accommodation would be free, everything would be free. But maybe that's aiming a little too high. But if we can move to that economy where that isn't free, it would be nice to think that the people who are doing things in a way that fits with this new model are actually getting paid for their time and are able to live, in a way where they can put money back into other things. But that's, that would be an area I really needed to move into and learn about.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Firstly, I would definitely say scaling through a network. So it's not like you going off and doing it in somewhere else. It's you just saying, look, we've done this awesome thing. It's worked for 30 years. Other people can do it too. And there will be loads of other communities who are trying to do similar things, right? So by creating a network, you allow both others to learn from your experiences and you to learn from others, and essentially like share experience so that everyone can develop together, or in their own way, but draw on everyone else's experience. And then in terms of money and getting things for free and that kind of thing, so being able to pay people. So I think complementary currencies have a lot of potential here. So for example, if there are I don't know, like bakeries and other like no waste food shops or those kind of things, who you've got a network with, and they're willing to or you could get a council. So if you have a social currency or a token currency where by doing things within your art supply kind of chain, people can earn a token that can then be spent in places that allow it to be spent in. So, which could be, you know, little markets or whatever. And then, so that basically that doesn't involve actual money. So it means that either the places that receive the tokens, they need to either want to receive the tokens, that because they know that shows them that they're giving the stuff, they're giving it away to people who deserve it, or if the token is funded. So if the local council, like there's a system that I explained, there's a currency in Rabot in Ghent in Belgium that has this. It's like a social currency, and that's for people doing all sorts of things in the community, and they earn, in that case, they earn a small amount of money per hour, but basically some kind of a system where the tokens are earned for a specific amount, and then if you can persuade the council to fund the tokens, so that then the shops who receive the tokens can go to the council and get money for them, so they actually get funding for it, then that's a way of funding that specific little network. And yeah, so that's one example of how complementary currencies can be used. And they can also, so an example that is one that I just kind of made up of, that's on a kind of council scale. Actually, it's a little bit complicated. Basically, there's loads of ways in which complementary currencies can make things kind of like free for the people who are doing good community activities, essentially. In it, rather than paying money that can then be spent anywhere. It's like, well, by doing these kind of activities, you can have whatever things that you want anyway, kind of thing.
We did actually try Wholecoin in 2014, and it only failed due to lack of uptake. As an experiment, it was good, but it just never really caught on because there weren't enough variety of places that would join in on it. But that was very early, I think, in 2014. And tokenized currencies obviously now are much more understood. We have looked at the possibility of a DAO and using things in that way as well. Decentralized autonomous organization might be the way to do it, using a token, like you said. But also Hull and East Riding Time Bank, just swapping time for time, hours by hours. That works very well here as well. But obviously the scale of that doesn't work quite so well for us because, you know, I mean, I'm volunteering full time, so no one else is going to give me their full time back. You know, it's so it's the scalability, and I think what you have inspired me to do is look again at the tokenization options, because 2014 was a long time ago, and it's about time we reviewed it. Thank you for that.
Nice. Yeah. And yeah, the one is the Torikes. I go into it in my book, and like the stuff online and in other books and what have you, the Torikes currency in Rabot in Ghent is a really good one. For it was designed by, I'm not sure how you pronounce his surname, but Bernard Leerter, I think it is, who's like, he's now dead, but he was the world expert in complementary currencies. And yeah, it's a really good one as a kind of show how those kind of things are done.
Just Alan, to add to your chat about collectivities and resiliency, like a collective makes you even more resilient, I think, as well. So like in our collective, we have a communication channel called Discord where we've got 15 different channels on there. The one that's the best is the wins channel. And like, you can be having a really shit week or you've not done anything that you feel particularly good for a couple of weeks, but everyone else is celebrating something they're doing. And that helps create that resilience, and it helps drive something forward, because we don't hear about these things in the everyday press. That's one of the really, really big problems that we face. We're in this massive press doom cycle when we move from one really doom-led story to another, and there's just no sign of hope for someone if you're just reading that news. And I think that's why I feel in myself in quite a happy position, because I get to see all that work every day on that wins channel. And I think, yeah, trying to network and being a collective just does make it even more resilient than you are now. And one thing we do here is we get loads of secondhand uniforms from like ski schools, businesses that have gone out of business, lots of stuff after Brexit because people couldn't employ British staff as much. So we get loads of that, and we actually just patch over the logo and we resell it in our community. I spoke to a ski hill in New Zealand, and within a month they'd found an organisation called Wastebusters there, and we'd launched the same project in New Zealand, and they were keeping hundreds and hundreds of bits of uniform out within a couple of weeks. And it's that effect that means networks can go just really, really fast. They're nimble as well, because there's not loads of bureaucracy, because someone else is already set up somewhere else, and so they can just take on your ideas, or you can take on theirs. So I think that for me, I see loads of hope in trying to build as big a collectives as we can, and we do actually have a lot of power if we build them. That's how I feel anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to say also that speaking to you, Gavin and Alan, I really feel like I'm speaking people who are like doing all of this, and like I'm a bit like, oh, sorry, I've got just writing about these things, and it's amazing to like hear and speak to you guys who are, you know, yeah, really building important new things, kind of thing, and building resilience into communities. And yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. Not surprisingly, we've run over time. Julie Allen's just put a nice comment in the chat, but I just wondered, we ought to really wrap up, but there's some people that haven't had an opportunity to talk yet. Magnus, Louise, maybe Simon. Are there some last things you'd like to either ask or comment on from this evening?
That's really kind of from my perspective. I just need to get a copy of the book.
Cool. Jane, any last thoughts from your side?
No, I think kind of echoing what Gavin was saying about hope, and looking at Julie's comment about the importance of community, and, you know, getting you through on the days that are lonely. And I think for me, I'm coming out of this probably more positive than I felt in quite a few days, just at, you know, that realization that not only can it be done, but it is being done, and the hope, the optimism. And it's the same messages coming through from all of us. It's resilience, it's community. That comes from community, it comes from connection. I think we all know it, and I think we probably all feel that we can walk away today just a little bit better prepared to do more than we could maybe an hour and a half ago. And if that's true for anyone else, then I think we've achieved something.
Cool. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Jane and Paddy for putting together this evening and letting us sort of talk to the author of the book. That was great. That was really insightful. Thanks very much. And thank you everyone for your contributions as well. A couple of things I'd just like to finish with. You know, I keep talking about me at my stage of life, but the one thing I've realized over the last couple of years, which has helped me to sort of face the positive side of it, is that 30 years ago, these conversations weren't taking place. You know, 40 years ago, there weren't people like us even doing it on scale. And what I've witnessed through my lifetime, just in the last 30, 40 years, is that books like Paddy's are coming out so frequently now. You know, they're optimistic, talking about system, talking about societal change. And it's based on the fact that there's so many young people just doing it, like Gavin. You know, I've lived in Switzerland, I've been a skier all my life, and I can now see that industry just literally dying in my lifetime. Climate, but also the Swiss have just voted also to go for net zero. They've voted, they've got to have climate change, which they've rejected. So people are waking up, and it's not just the young people. I think people my age also realize now that we can support the young people to midwife in these changes we're talking about. So I'm full of confidence, and I trust there's people like Gavin and Paddy all over the world now that, you know, are just doing stuff and communicating it, because unless it's communicated, it's not going to have the impact. So the communication is the scale that people like Gavin will create across the world. So yeah, I get very depressed, especially when I think about my granddaughter's future. But tonight's filled me a lot more with that optimism, and again renewed my trust that there are people out there who are just going to do it, and then force the politicians to implement the legislative that's necessary to make official what the young people have been doing maybe for 10 or 15 years, because they know it works for them. So thank you all very much tonight. It's really enjoyable. Gavin, we must talk. I love your reaction stuff. I see you connected with lots of cool people, many of on this call. So just a quick heads up, we've got a big reclaiming marketing talk coming up in July. Alan Raw is a recently appointed director. In our AGM, which is an open meeting in July, let's get the date, it's July the 21st. Alan will be lifting the lid on what's happening within Hull, specifically in October, where there's a whole festival of local activities taking place, and how Alan is going about organising that. So feel free to drop in and listen to that. It'll be a very inclusive conversation, because ASP will be supporting what the people in Hull are doing, and we'll be looking to inject ideas from outside to complement the massive ideas and action and inside. So everyone here will be invited. So watch the newsletter, watch the website. There'll be more news on that. And again, thank you very much for coming along. I'll get the recording sorted out in the next few days, and that'll be in the email to you. So once again, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. That was awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Paddy. Bye.
Bye.